welcome to the online CU. His name's Bonnie.
And this is Ben.
That's right. Now, Bonnie, before we begin, I've got a joke for you. Knock, knock.
Seriously, who's there?
Yeah.
Yahoo.
Well, aren't you excited to start the show tonight?
Oh, wow. You know what? Moving on from that, we've got Fresher News. It's the part of the show where one of our members reads the news in just 30 seconds.
Yeah, now the other week we had Elliot telling it, but that was then, and this is new. So up next, it's Alistair Grew.
Up to you, Alistair.
Well, thank you, Ben. I'm Alistair Grew, and these are the new headlines for this week. As of last Wednesday, we have a new Pope, and in this online CU, we would like to congratulate Pope Francis on his election to position. Our thoughts and prayers are with you in your new role. In other news last week, the Samsung Galaxy S4 was announced with much hot fanfare and hype, but what are your thoughts about Samsung's latest phone? Please get in contact with us here at the Online CU. Moving the focus over to Staffordshire University news, we can finally announce after many, many months that F5 Lab has brand new computers. Unfortunately, however, the saga isn't over.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, sorry. Didn't quite manage to do it there.
Have a go.
Yeah, sorry.
No
Sorry
worries.
for that, mate.
Moving on now.
Right. So now we move on to one of our the most favorite section of ours, really, new tricks.
Yeah, it's that time of the night where we get to ask one of our members to learn a really new trick that'll make them the envy of the campus.
Indeed, Ben. So this week we have the biggest superstar on campus, our very own DJ Heat, member of the newly formed Stafford Heat Mafia.
Yep. Bonnie? Well, you guys watch for yourself. And by the way, Alex is our resident organist.
Wow.
So good luck.
You see, Alex is what you'd know as a bit of a organist, let's put it that way. Someone who plays the posh stuff, the old-fashioned stuff, the stuff of many centuries ago.
Still good.
So I'm trying to teach him the new modern art of scratch DJing. Okay, well Alex, your first lesson is the sample. What you have to do is you have to find a certain sample in a record and just let it play out.
Like a place.
Yes, a sample is a certain sound.
Yeah.
Make sure you hold it kind of nice and tenderly, but not so tenderly that it slips through your fingers like that. Push down on it. Don't be slowing down a platter, but at the same time, don't let it slip through your fingers. Open the fader and then let go of the record, follow it round, and when it gets to the end of the sample, close the fader, bring it back, and repeat. Close the fader, bring it back, opening fader, follow round.
Okay, actually lift off.
Back, way back. You're letting go too softly. I can hear the slight approach.
No, well,
Okay, how about you just practice doing that for a while? Try and it for this.
yeah, that could be a good idea.
Yeah, see, I'm doing exactly what you were doing there. The only difference is, do it with the music. Make sure it's in flow, make sure it's in tempo.
Can you open the top bit or just drop it?
Flick the fader in. He's getting it. So, the way this is working is one fast strike, 3 times, and then letting go as you were doing before. I don't want to hear you pushing the record back. I'm not an easy teacher. Tell you what, Alex, I'll make a deal with you. Play this well, and I'll eat this pizza quickly so that the aroma's no longer in the room. 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike, 4. There you go. The hand movement is the most important part of scratch. You're letting the record slip through your fingers slightly. You've got it in you. Be the record. Officially succeeded at the challenge of
DJ.
a first basic level of scratch DJing. So Alex, I congratulate you.
Thank you.
You have the hip hop in your heart. Now, as your homework, what you're going to do is you're going to be reading this book, How to DJ Properly.
Wow. Thank you.
Wow, that was something, Alex, you know. The scratch DJing all the way around. And Jamie, for the guys who do not know, he's the long-haired dude, you know, was a bit crazy on the top and stuff. You know, he was quite the teacher there.
It was all right.
Yeah, and Alex is an organist, man. That guy did something, you know, he pulled it off, you know. What do you think? He's going to be the next DJ in town?
Moving on, before we mix it up with our main talk, we're going to turn up the gain as we have a food for thought section with tonight's producers.
Wow, okay.
And now it's time for Food for Thought.
With me, Jamie G. Now, there's a common saying that all truth is relative. It just depends on what you believe. What that means is that what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. But there is one slight problem with that. You're saying that that is definitely the truth. As the old rapper Lecrae once said, if what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, what if my truth says that yours is a lie? Also, when two people fall out, you often find that there's two sides of the story. One of them is a lie, and the other is true. For example, two people I knew once had a bit of a fallout, and there were many different sides of the story as to what actually ended up happening with one of them. One said that one person punched the other, but that person denied it and said it was never true. Of course, what we actually came to find out is that he actually slept with his girlfriend instead. Now, you know that one of them's a lie and one of them's true. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to belief, personal belief in faith or any kind of religion, the rule seems to be different. See, now we all know that truth is fact, and for that very reason, truth can't be relative. Truth is truth. Don't you want to know what the real truth is?
Thank you for that, Jamie. Well, that was excellent. Well, who writes this stuff, man? Well, for the guys out there, Jamie's our director, he's our in-house DJ, and he's quite the chef as well. In just a moment, we'll bring our guest up on stage so we can grill him with a few more questions. Before that, he delivers his talk. It's up to you guys.
Well, thank you for that, Bunny. Matt, welcome to the Online CU.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, how are you?
I'm all the better for hearing those brilliant puns.
Well, Matt, now what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of questions that you might be asked, say if you turned up on Freshers, you know, first day here. Sort of questions we'd like to find out about you.
Yep.
So, Matt, quick fire. Xbox or Wii?
Wii.
Mac or PC?
PC.
Starbucks or Costa?
Starbucks.
Thing 1 or Thing 2?
2.
Origin or Steam?
Don't understand the question.
ATI or NVIDIA?
Don't understand the question.
Okay, 7-Up or Sprite?
7-Up.
Okay, Age of Empires 2 or Age of Empires 3?
Both.
Oh, okay. Metal or dubstep?
Dubstep.
VB or C Sharp?
C Sharp.
Poker or blackjack?
Blackjack.
Simpsons or Family Guy?
Family Guy all the way.
Pizza or burger and chips?
Both.
Okay. Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
Ballet or opera?
Opera.
Okay. Jamie or Mike?
Both. I was thinking about the opera question.
Okay. EA or Ubisoft?
Don't understand the question.
Okay. FIFA or real football?
Real football.
Okay. Cordial or squash?
Squash.
Bond or Chuck Norris?
Bond.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Matt. I forgot your name there for a second. Coming up now is Matt giving talk on Uncover B, is it?
It's Uncover B, yeah, from this book, and it's called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Well, it's all yours, Matt.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to look tonight, we're going to look at how do we see ourselves. We're going to use the scripture from the Who's Coming to Dinner passage in there, and it's taken from Luke chapter 7, verses 36. And it's about an actual dinner setting, and there's a kind of a host there. The host is a Pharisee. There is Jesus in attendance. And there's this woman who is only described as a sinful woman present at this dinner. And we're going to look at two responses to Jesus, that of the Pharisee and that of this sinful woman. The Pharisee is kind of holding the dinner. He's the host. Who is a Pharisee? He's kind of a very religious man, probably someone who keeps the rules, someone who is very upstanding in the community, someone who is probably at this point quite intrigued by Jesus, probably someone who is maybe fearing who Jesus is, maybe he's worried about his religious standing with this new teacher who's kind of gaining lots of attention and interest. So maybe the Pharisee is trying to pick off Jesus and find fault in him. Maybe the Pharisee is trying to get some sort of celebrity status. This is the latest person to come into town and draw a crowd. So whatever reason, this dinner contains this Pharisee. The other person, as I said, was described as a sinful woman. What that means is she was probably a prostitute. Why was she there? Maybe she'd sort of seen Jesus preaching somewhere. Maybe she'd heard him preaching. Maybe she'd heard about a miracle that he'd done. Maybe it was just the talk of the town was this Jesus who was hanging around and saying all kinds of interesting things. Maybe she'd heard that Jesus was the sort of person that had time for people like her, people on the margins of society, people who other people might walk past in the street. But for whatever reason, at this dinner, we've got a Pharisee and we've got this sinful woman. It's interesting to look at the two reactions to Jesus at this dinner. The Pharisee has absolutely no manners. The way that he responds to Jesus is actually quite embarrassing, is actually quite rude. In Jewish tradition, it was important for the host of the dinner to kiss the person who came in. It was important for them to anoint with perhaps some perfume or some oil. And it was important for them to wash their feet because obviously it's so hot and there's kind of dust and sand everywhere and the person might have walked quite far. They didn't have many cars back then. So it's really important that the host would do these things. But we read as we go through the chapter that actually the Pharisee guy, he's called Simon, didn't do any of these things. Conversely, this sinful woman has this really incredible encounter with Jesus. This sinful woman does all those things that she should have done, that the Pharisee should have done. This sinful woman actually gets down on her knees. This sinful woman is absolutely desperate to have an encounter with Jesus. The Bible talks about her hair being kind of mopping up the tears. She's weeping, and the tears are falling onto the feet of Jesus. And her hair is used to wipe the tears up. It's really interesting, back in Jewish tradition, if you're a woman and you wanted to come across as quite self-respected or self-respectful, you would make sure your hair was nice and tidy and make sure it looked appropriate. If you were going to go meet a new rabbi in town, a religious leader, someone who people are talking about, you'd want to look smart. But this lady didn't care what she looked like. All she wanted to do was go and meet Jesus to have this encounter with him. So there she is, on her knees, crying, her hair's everywhere, not caring what other people are saying, not caring what other people are thinking, not caring what other people are perceiving, just wanting to have this encounter with Jesus. Verse 39 is kind of the Pharisee talking, and he's not talking to Jesus, but Jesus either overhears it or kind of magically finds out what he's thinking. But he says this, if this man were a prophet, and Jesus isn't claiming to be a prophet at this time, he's claiming to be God as he talks about forgiving sins. If this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman it is who is touching him, and what kind of woman she is a sinner. He's saying, if Jesus really knew who this person was, if he really was a man of God, he wouldn't be anywhere near this woman. So there we have two different responses to Jesus. One is this person, this Pharisee, who has no kind of concept of his sin, no concept of him being in any need to meet with God. And then there's this sinful woman, this prostitute woman, who everyone knows her story, everyone knows her background, absolutely desperate to meet with this person, this man of God, this prophet, whoever he might be at this stage. Jesus responds to this by using a great analogy. And because I've got such great artistic skills, I'm going to update the analogy into modern day thinking. So you'll be very excited by that prospect, I know. But he tells this story. He tells it about as if there's two students. One of them, let's say he's called Rupert. Rupert owes some money to the student finance department. Say he owes £500. He's upgraded his iPad 11 to an iPad 12. See, it's set in the future, about 6 months. That's a joke. He's upgraded his iPad anyway, and it's cost him £500. So He comes to the end of his course and he thinks, well, I've got this £500 bill, but then a letter drops through the door for him, and he picks up the letter and he reads it, and it says, "Dear Mr. Rupert," his name's Rupert clearly, "Dear Mr. Rupert, your £500 has been waived. You don't need to pay this bill anymore. You don't need to pay the balance anymore." Rupert is going to think, that is a good day for me. It's a good day at the office. He's going to be pleased about that. But imagine there's a second student, let's call him Ben, for instance. Imagine this second student who isn't kind of like Rupert. He hasn't got the cash that Rupert's got. And Ben has to borrow 45 grand just in order to pay his bills, in order to pay his rent, in order to pay his lecky, in order to get his food. To do all those things, buying presents for ministers in training of Baptist churches, all those things that students want to do, Ben has had to borrow £45,000. Now imagine the last day of his course when he is kind of contemplating this great debt that he owes, when a letter comes through the door, "Dear Mr. Ben, your final balance of £45,000 has been wiped away. You don't need to pay it." And Jesus says, he says, of these two people, who is the most grateful to the student finance department? Who is most pleased with this situation? And the answer that the Pharisee would give is, he'd say, well, of course it was Ben. It was the person who had the big debt. It was the person who was faced with a life with a big burden behind them of the cost of his education. And that's a great analogy of these two people, the Pharisee and the sinful woman. You see, the Pharisee it was just like Rupert. He had no concept of his sin. £500 on an iPad. Maybe the Pharisee, maybe he wasn't as sinful as the sinful woman. Maybe he was generally a good guy. But like anyone, we all fall short, the Bible says. We all are in need of forgiveness. But this guy just didn't recognize it in any way at all. He didn't recognize any need in him to have God in his life. Whereas this sinful woman, this prostitute woman with her hair everywhere, not caring what anyone thought, she's just like Ben. He's just had £45,000 given back to him in his bank account. Ben's going to be running down the corridor in his boxer shorts, trying to get to the student union office and to make sure that this is true. He's going to be phoning people. He's going to be Facebooking. He won't care what anyone thinks because he's had this debt cancelled. And this sinful woman actually is just the same as that, because she owns this big debt. The very fact that she's called the sinful woman means that everyone knows what has gone wrong in her life, what it is in her life that is a struggle for her. Yet it's her who has the real encounter with Jesus. Why is it? Because she owns her sin. She knows her sin. She knows what it is that holds her back from God. She knows her history, and she knows that she needs God. And the big question for us, the big challenge for us on this Who's Coming to Dinner kind of just short talk reflection, the big challenge for us, and I don't want you to consider it now because you're sat there in front of a computer and you've got Facebook on and whatever and YouTube. When you go to bed tonight, when your head hits the pillow, I just encourage you to think, who am I in that story? Am I a Pharisee who kind of doesn't perceive themselves to have any need for God in their life, doesn't perceive themselves to have any need for forgiveness, to have any need for God to come into their life in any way at all? Or am I going to be a bit more like the sinful woman? Am I going to be a bit more like someone who admits and has a real encounter with God? Because she didn't pretend to be someone else. She didn't pretend that she was okay. She didn't do her hair and try and pretend to be someone who had got their life together. She had an encounter with Jesus because she was absolutely real about who she was before him. And that, folks, is the challenge for us. Are we a Pharisee, or are we like this woman, real?
Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. We'll be hearing from Matt again in just a moment. Let me take a few questions from the studio audience and also questions from last week.
Yeah, now if you're watching on YouTube, you can reach us on Twitter with @Theonlinecu. We're on Facebook again with /Theonlinecu. And we're on Ask FM as well, again with /Theonlinecu.
Yes. So now we'll be going back to Matt after the short video from Ian. Ian is the local pastor at Elim Church here in Stafford.
Hello, my name is Ene Dunphy. I'm the senior pastor at the Stafford Elim Christian Centre, and I'm here to tell my story about what God's done in my life. As you may pick up from my accent, especially as I continue to talk, I come from Ireland, although that accent has diminished quite a lot by now. my story began being Irish as a Catholic, and a very devout Catholic, coming from a devout Catholic family. And we were very religious, going to Mass every Sunday. And we were very happy in that situation, very content in that place. I remember one year being on holidays with my family. I was about 15 at the time, and we had family friends with us on holiday. And this couple were busy. I saw them one day in their tent reading their Bibles. And I thought, why are they reading the Bibles? It just looked strange to me. And then the Sunday came, and they didn't go to Mass, as was expected from Catholics. As you go to Mass every Sunday. And they didn't go to Mass. I thought, what hypocrites that they're not going to Mass, but they're busy pretending to be religious by reading their Bibles. The following months from there, they kept inviting my parents along to some meetings. And my parents kept saying no to them, and went on for months. And eventually they said yes, just to keep them quiet, really. And they went along. It was a whole weekend convention of these meetings. I went along with them for the first night. I don't know why, but we went along. And on that night, I was very comfortable having the meal. That was great. As a 15-year-old having a free meal, that was fabulous. The singing, well, that was really awkward. You don't want to stand and sing. So I stayed sat until it became more embarrassing to sit than it did to stand, so you end up standing. Got through that bit, and then heard the guy sharing his story. And that really impacted me. He shared about how God was real in his life. He shared some stories how God intervened with his daughter when his daughter was on a farming accident back in America, and how God healed her instantly from an horrendous accident. And that really just touched me, how God was so real in his life and was so evidently part of his life. Now, I knew all about God, but for me, God was distant. And so I was intrigued by that. To cut a long story short, at the end of the night, they made an appeal for people to come forward. And both my mum, my dad, and myself went forward and talked to a gentleman that we'd gotten to know who sat near us at a table. And through that conversation, we ended up giving our lives to Christ and inviting Jesus to be our Lord and Saviour. So God's really changed my life from being someone who was growing up in an economic climate, who knew God at a distance, to coming to a place where I had a security in my life that whatever things looked like, God was in control, and God had my life in his hands. And he was just so much more real to me than he ever was before. He was walking with me. He was with me every step of the way. And he has led me. And I've seen his faithfulness in so many different ways, providing for me, opening up doors, closing doors, just being there the whole way.
Thank you, Ian. Now we're here with Matt, who's going to take some questions. We've had some questions coming in online, which is pretty weird because obviously we're not live tonight, but we have had a question in online and from the studio audience. So yeah, we're going to do, if you do have any more questions though, please feel free to send them in, and we'll try and answer them after Easter. So for now, Matt, here are some of the questions that have been asked. Isn't Matt that guy from the House of Bread? Matt, what is the House of Bread? For the guys at home, what is the House of Bread and why do you do it?
Well, do I look at the camera for this, or you, Ben?
Yeah, you've got you can do whatever you want.
Very beautiful face, obviously.
Let's
the House of Bread is really important to me. It's an organisation that I was part of when it began, and it's something that actively gives the church a sort of a safe environment to serve and minister and love probably the most poor and the most marginalised of the town. And for me, that's something that the Bible is really clear on, of how, as Christians, as people who are followers of who Jesus is and what he said and who God is, that we should treat the poor and treat the marginalised in a certain way. And the House of Bread seeks to be a vehicle to allow the Christians of Stafford and the surrounding area to do that and to do it effectively.
Okay. We've had another question about what does God say about violent video games?
Great question. I think it depends on kind of how far down the line you go. I was addicted to eBay for about a week recently, and I did bid on Grand Theft Auto, but I didn't win it, thankfully. But actually, I think as long as you can enter into that and just think this is just a game and this is fine, I don't think God would really, I don't imagine that God would have a big kind of issue with that. The Bible talks about taking thoughts captive. Paul talks about it in, I think it's Corinthians. And I think the moment that you kind of go to bed at night and you're imagining shooting policemen and slashing tyres and stuff, I think that's probably the point at which you need to be careful about how far down the line you're going with enjoying video games. So on the surface, I like to think I enjoy all kinds of things, all kinds of comedy and different types of computer games. But I think the moment that they take over our thought processes, I think that's probably a time to just take that thought captive and turn away from it.
Okay, and final question for tonight. How do you know that God exists? Is it a personal experience or is it just blind faith?
Again, awesome question. I think there comes a point in everyone's spiritual journey where it goes from being a faith that is learned to a faith that is kind of real. I think every spiritual journey takes a step of faith. So I would say it's both. Part of it is learning about it, part of it is finding out through the Bible. The Bible is full of great stories, really stories that we can hold historical kind of weight. Stories of people who died for what they believed in, what they had seen with their very own eyes. And it goes from somewhere around that to hearing great stories and great testimonies about, as you've just heard from Ian, about people who've been healed. But actually, yeah, it takes a step of faith. And that's something that I did 10 years ago. And for me, it's a real relationship. It's knowing God is a very real thing. I'll be really clear on that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Matt. Thank you for what you've been talking about tonight and for answering those questions. So yeah, over to Bonnie.
Yep, thanks, Matt. And keep letting the questions come up. We really hope that you enjoyed watching this show. So, over to you, Ben.
Yeah, just to let you know, so you don't get all your plans ruined for the next couple of weeks, we're away on our Easter break.
Yes. So our next show will be on Monday, the 8th of April at 7 p.m.
Yeah, now finally remember to let us know what you thought of everything through the social networking sites, which are all linked to through our website.
So for now, guys, thanks for watching. And from all of us here at the Theonlinecu, have a great Easter.
Or you could say, have a hoppy Easter. And of course, you stay classy, Stafford.
Cheers.